Book 7, The Soldier in the Middle of the World, Chapter 13. If you don't win, what's the point in playing? The lieutenant stared at the stack of books that towered precariously on the grand desk of the main study in Thorne's mansion. Command school had come to him, along with his own personal professor. He was an elderly man with a fringe of white hair around his bald head, and a face wrinkled in a permanent and flabby scowl. He'd arrived the afternoon before, on the 31st day of harvest, in a carriage filled with textbooks. Idemia was still unstable, now battling outbreaks of violence. So General Thorne decided it best to keep Lieutenant Thorne away, where he could study without distractions, beginning the 32nd day of harvest. The lieutenant wasn't entirely happy about that. He'd had free rein in Edge and the fort for several weeks, only glancing at the books the general had sent up earlier with his promotion. But now his long holiday was over. He eyed Professor Slither warily, who huffed and creaked with every step. He'd retired a few years ago, having had the distinction of being the only professor to teach every topic in command school. "The general wishes you to be prepared for any situation," the professor droned. "So our task is to complete your education as quickly as possible." He dropped himself into a large padded chair behind the desk and regarded his luxurious surroundings. "What a marvelous setting for my retirement," he decided. Professor Slither made it clear to Lieutenant Thorne that he was not only a tutor, but a chaperone, guardian, and all-around busybody. Slither had been given the main floor bedroom where he could watch on the lieutenant's movements in and out of the mansion. The lieutenant could see his angle. As long as Slither made himself useful, he could live nearly like a king in the general's mansion. "So let's get to it," Slither said, popping into his mouth a pastry that he'd requested the cook whip up for him. The lieutenant obediently removed the top book from the pile, careful not to topple it. The book was leather-bound, with the pages cut precisely. Basic Combat. Well, at least the titles were to the point. Hopefully the writing would be just as concise, or this could take years. He opened the book to see the name of the author, Cain Thorne. "We'll begin with that one," Slither intoned. "I brought the full collection of command school works, and even a couple of the classics from the old High General's mansion." The lieutenant nodded dully as he pulled book after book off the pile. Mace strategies in the Great War, negotiation tactics, world leadership, caring for your horse so it cares for you. The lieutenant tried not to smirk as he lifted another title, World History. He'd already read that one, but by another author with a different take on events. The book at the bottom of the pile surprised him because he'd already seen that title, Basic Combat. "One of the classics that I mentioned," Slither said, "written by your alleged great-grandfather Ralph Shin. Apparently Thorne was rather fond of the old text and wanted you to have this." The lieutenant tried not to sigh. He'd envisioned command school to be like his first few weeks of training, only with more action and swordplay. But as he looked at the lists of terms, dates, and names he was expected to memorize for next week's test, he realized this was going to be as tedious as studying to be a doctor. And it was, as Slither merely read from the texts, droning on dully for half an hour about Cain Thorne's basic combat theories, until the lieutenant finally heard something perplexing. "Battle is always a game of dices, with fate choosing the victor, favoring the man with the extra silver chip. You have a question, Lieutenant?" The lieutenant's mouth was pursed. Fate? Extra silver chips that didn't belong? Did that mean planning was useless? Witness his perfectly planned attempt to enter the world just over a year ago and how that was a dismal failure. But extra silver chips? "How many men play dices with their own silver chips, sir?" Slither smiled slyly. "Only the ones who intend to win, Lieutenant. We can't leave important matters up to fate. Dices is a game of fate, and we have to force fate." Well, none of that made any sense. So success was neither planning nor fate, but force? But isn't it obvious, sir, that in dices some of the silver chips are counterfeit? If suddenly there are 3 chips instead of 1, Slither held up a finger. That's when force comes into play. If the general is playing dices, do you really think anyone is going to accuse him of throwing in the counterfeit chip? So it was force that won. Cheating. Fate favored the bullies. So, do whatever it takes to win, the lieutenant said, his old cynicism reviving. Of course, said Slither easily. By the scowl on your face, you think I'm talking about cheating, don't you? But that's not what it is. The point is to thwart your enemy's plans, then take advantage of the situation gone wrong. The general's masterful at that. Witness what happened at the border battle for Idumea. Thorn knew there were men on both sides hoping to take out Sargon and himself, so he threw in a few unexpected silver chips to confuse the game. Killing Lick was one of them. According to tradition, the assisting battle commander, Captain Lick, should have been riding on Thorn's left side, where you were, but he was on his right, so Thorn could kill him with the sword arm more easily. There was at least one plot to eliminate you, Lieutenant, and its mastermind was Lick. With Lick gone, his men, whoever they were confused. Was that cheating to preserve you and dispatch your enemy? Only a fool would think so. Then Thorn pulled out another silver chip, you. Sending you to the other side confused the plotters against him and changed all the angles. The angles, the lieutenant repeated, barely keeping up. The angles at striking him, of course. You and your horse, going to Sargon's side, shifted the line down several feet. Thorn had recognized the soldier who he suspects fired the first shot. Years ago, that officer had sworn to Thorn's face he'd kill him someday, so he positioned you right next to him. When Thorn stepped out into the neutral area, he purposely walked in a diagonal to further shift the angles of those he suspected to take a shot at him. When he shook Sargon's hand, he stepped in such a way that Sargon acted as his shield. But the officer next to you was still determined to take the shot. Of course, the small arrow that hit Sargon was intended for Thorn. Thorn also suspected Jordan was going to attack Sargon, then himself. Thorn's rearranging of the players changed all of that. Jordan's men panicked, misfired, and hit Thorn's body shield instead of his arm. Then everyone else panicked. Thorn created chaos. Slither held out his hands as if displaying a work of art. The same chaos that occurred in Moorland decades ago. The same chaos that defeated the Garters and let your supposed grandfather claim victory. Chaos, with a little bit of fate and his secret body armor, allowed Thorn to prevail once again. The lieutenant wasn't sure of any of that. Chaos is fate? When Slither rolled his eyes, he asked, So what do you mean by fate? Slither raised his eyebrows. Fate! The will of the stars, boy. The desire of nature and its laws. Who it decides should prevail. The lieutenant frowned. Decides? So fate has a consciousness? Slither cocked his head. Consciousness? Of course not. But if it decides and has a desire, that suggests some kind of a knowledge, ability to think. Are you saying that I claim there's a higher consciousness at work in the world? He boomed. Not sure why that notion agitated the old man so much. The lieutenant said a meek, No, sir. Slither exhaled. Consider it's luck when nature agrees. He stopped, realizing the word agrees would also suggest a consciousness. When what you want is in harmony with nature's will. Again he stopped, and the lieutenant nearly smirked because will also suggested a higher consciousness, which seemed to irk Slither to no end. It's random, Slither finally decided, like waves at the sea. Ever been to the sea, boy?" The lieutenant shook his head. Slither nodded authoritatively. "The waves at the sea move in random ways. Some speculate it's tied to the moon's phases, but that's foolishness. Every once in a while, a giant wave crashes down on visitors. Now, is nature manifesting fury that people are walking on its sands? Of course not. It's just coincidence. The lucky ones are those whose nature's coincidences favor. Pure chance. Understand?" The lieutenant didn't. Seeing too many problems with the logic where nature and fate favor, yet don't favor, and where things happen purely by luck because nature says so without saying anything. "So take advantage of the situation, like March and Idemia, because of the volcano?" "Yes," Slither said. "Work the situation. Now, some people think that's cheating, but those are people of lower intelligence. We play smart. There is no cheating, at least not for people like us." "How so?" Slither's permanent scowl deepened as if he were offended. "Cheating implies going against the rules, but rules change. Citizens are opposed to us breaking the rules, but not with us changing them." "How convenient," the lieutenant nearly blurted. Instead, he said, "So leaders are above the rules and change them when necessary, just like in dices where the players can decide which silver chip they agree is the real one. Just toss the rules?" Slither sighed, his patience thinning like his hair. "The citizenry needs to follow the rules, otherwise we'd have too much disorder to manipulate. We aren't above the rules, just to the side of them. Why is this so difficult for you?" The lieutenant shrugged. "I'm just trying to understand." "You don't need to understand, boy. You need to accept, or you start sounding like a debate—" He stopped before finishing the word, and instead glared at the young officer. "Yes, sir." He hadn't realized until then that Mari Shin was coming out of his mouth again. "Sorry. So the general needs the citizens to follow the rules which are in the best interest of the world." Slither scoffed. "In the best interest of the general, boy. Start thinking like one of the elite. We let the world believe the laws are in their best interest, but every leader knows the first interest is himself. Why do you think so many men are hungry for the position? Harmony is maintained when the citizens believe their leader has them as the first priority. If they believe their general is not concerned about them, they'll rebel, like they did against the administrators." Slither continued earnestly. "So Thorn provides what they want, as long as it doesn't conflict with his personal goals. Free entertainment at the arenas and amphitheaters, no restrictions caused by marriage, access to cheap vials and mead. He gives the sheep what they want, within reason. And those who are unreasonable, he eliminates. The braying donkey takes the arrow. It's simple, and it's worked for decades." The lieutenant remembered how his grandmother supposedly was killed by arrows in the forest. He hoped he didn't appear to be braying, but he really did want to know. "Sir, what happens when people speak the truth, but it's in conflict with what General Thorne says?" Slither narrowed his eyes. "You need to be careful how you phrase things, Lieutenant Thorne," he said evenly, pointing a chubby finger at him. "You're suggesting there are truths that are unconditional. But you and I both know, don't we, that truth is whatever someone believes to be the truth. There's no one set of true guidelines. Oh, there was at one time," he waved impatiently. "A whole book my generation was forced to believe. The best thing the administrators did was demonstrate that the writings was an elaborate scheme developed by a great ancient dictator, some man who styled himself the Creator. All he did was create a totalitarian society that believed whatever he told them. They followed his teachings without question." Slither stopped, seemingly caught up in a thought. The lieutenant shifted in his chair, waiting. Shaking himself, Slither focused back on the lieutenant. Understand this very carefully. Whatever one man or woman proclaims to be the truth is true only to that person. It's not as if there are any truths that all people agree to. Sir, the lieutenant interrupted, knowing that it provoked the old man, but he really wanted to know. Are you sure? Wouldn't all people agree that murder is wrong? Slither's smile seemed more like a sneer. You know, at first I didn't believe who they said you were, but you really are her grandson, aren't you? He said quietly. You sound just like her, as if you inherited her mind. What a pity. The lieutenant bit his tongue. He inherited. I'm sorry, sir. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if I understand the reasoning, then I can accept the ideas. I just feel the need to discuss them. Slither slammed the book on the side table. No, you don't, especially you. Sir, please, why? Slither pointed. That question, right there, causes the biggest problems in the world. Except that it's not for you to know why, because the more you ask that question, the harder life will be. Crete, you really are her grandson, aren't you? He said in disgust. The lieutenant had to ask. You mean Mari Shin? Who else? Probably not a man alive who knows more about her than I do besides Thorne. I was attending the university in Mount Scene when she attended the women's college. Her father used to be a respected teacher, but his daughter? Slither scoffed a bitter laugh. That was her downfall, Lieutenant Thorne. Her insisting to know the truth, which no one can know because there is no one truth. She wasted hours of her life in debate, insisting on asking why to everything. She was insufferable, and I had to endure her for hours each week because no women would debate her. The professors thought it'd be amusing to have her take on the men. He exhaled irately and looked out the window. Lieutenant Thorne couldn't help himself. Did you ever have to debate her? Slither's brittle gaze shifted from the window to the lieutenant. Exceptionally fortunate for you that you look nothing like her, or we wouldn't even be in the same room, but yes, I did. Feeling brave, the lieutenant asked, What was the topic, sir? Slither's face barely moved. Why is there violence in the world? The lieutenant, considering the old man was unarmed, risked one more question. And what was the conclusion to the debate? Slither's jaw shifted. Men cause wars. The world would be better with women in charge, he said coldly. The lieutenant smirked, knowing it would make Slither smirk as well. Rather ironic conclusion, isn't it, sir, considering everything she did and caused? Indeed, Slither smiled as well. The lieutenant nearly grinned because Slither had fallen for an old debater's trick. Get the other side to smile with you. Common ground, then upper hand. Your grandmother caused more violence than any man, before or since, Slither declared, almost cheerfully, as if regaling a young admirer with tales of heroics. It was only later that I was able to dissect her arguments and realize how she twisted ideas to completely confuse me. It was no surprise years later to hear how she deceived the hapless colonel. He looked out the window, pensive. Remember, Lieutenant, the more beautiful the woman, the greater her ability to destroy you. When you look for companionship, love only the homely ones. They'll always adore you for the attention you give them, since no one ever gives them any. The beautiful ones will twist you, and even when you come around to their side, they'll never give you a second glance. Slither stopped, suddenly aware that he had drifted far off topic. "You can finish the chapter yourself," he said, nudging the book on the side table. "Write me a summary of it when you're finished." He stood up and shuffled off to the kitchen. And that's the end of that actually short chapter. Thank you.